Hello, students. In this lecture, we'll look at the structure of phrasal verbs. We will consider 3 different grammar points. We will also study a few select verbs. Phrasal verbs are composed of more than one word. Usually, they have a base verb and something that looks like a preposition. It doesn't always act like a preposition, so we call it a particle. Bring, make, give, call, all these basic verbs can combine with prepositions like up, on, along, off, to make words with new meanings. The slide shows you some examples. Notice that the phrasal verb is often equivalent to a verb that has a prefix. Bring up means suggest, sug and jest. Make up means reconcile. Give up means surrender. Call up means telephone. Such verbs with prefixes came into English from Latin or Greek, sometimes by way of French. They have a more formal sound than the true English phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs sound more informal. There are 2 kinds of phrasal verbs. We'll take as examples call up and call on. Remember that call up means telephone and call on means visit. Let's look at call up. This is a separating phrasal verb. The base verb and the particle can separate. An object that is a noun can go in 2 places, before or after the particle. The convict called up his lawyer, or the convict called his lawyer up. However, an object that is a pronoun must go before the particle. The convict called him up. If you say the convict called up him, it is not only wrong, but sounds vulgar. Up him actually sounds sexual in English, so you will want to avoid that. Now, let's look at call on. This is a non-separating verb. The object can only go after the preposition. The lawyer called on the convict. The lawyer called on him. You can think of this as a regular verb with a regular preposition. To review, let's compare the 2 versions with pronouns. The convict called him up, and the lawyer called on him. I suggest learning a verb like call up in a model sentence that shows where the preposition goes. Someone calls someone up. Now, let's look at another grammar point. We can form the passive with separating and non-separating phrasal verbs. Remember that in the passive, we make an object a subject and change the verb phrase. We use the auxiliary be and the past participle. The active sentence, people grow rice in China, becomes rice is grown in China. We don't form the passive if there is no object. The sentence, she ran away, doesn't form the passive because it has no object. You don't form the passive from intransitive verbs used with prepositions referring to time or space. We can't say, lunch was called after, or the Kremlin was gone to. However, many phrasal verbs do form the passive. You can say either they turned the light on or the light was turned on. She called on the student to solve the problem, or the student was called on to solve the problem. Separating phrasal verbs form the passive more often than non-separating phrasal verbs. Pause the video now to practice with phrasal verbs and the passive by changing these sentences to the passive. Try to use the same verb tense in the passive sentence as in the active. Here are the answers. Pause the video to check your work. Did you notice that the first sentence is simple past tense, but the second sentence is simple present? In the third sentence, I changed the word form to application. That allows me to leave out the phrase by the applicants. The sentence is shorter, but contains all the information. This is good style in English. I did something similar in the fourth sentence. I wrote movie star instead of using the phrase in the movie. In the last sentence, we would always change the word their stereo to my neighbor's stereo. It would be very awkward to say, the volume on their stereo wasn't turned down by my neighbors. The last grammar point we want to look at is a funny structure that sometimes results with phrasal verbs. Pause the video and read the sentences. Do you see any errors? In fact, these sentences are all correct. The verb hand in means submit. In 2 weeks means after 2 weeks have passed. Your paper must be handed in 2 weeks. That is a correct sentence. It means your paper must be submitted after 14 days. Don't assume if you see 2 identical prepositions in a row that the sentence is wrong. This little point tends to pop up on the accuplacer, so don't let it fool you. To finish up, let's look at one phrasal verb and do a few exercises. Call off means cancel. The model sentence is, someone calls something off. For example, we can say, the nervous bridegroom called the wedding off. Now let's do a little exercise. Think about the following statements. Are they true or false? Does the statement make sense? Pause the video and do the exercise. Okay, let's look at the answers. If you call off the wedding, you should be there on time. This is false, because if you call off the wedding, it will not happen. You don't have to be on time. Having called off the wedding, the groom went alone to Las Vegas. This could be true. The groom might go alone on a trip after his wedding is canceled. If you call off your mother-in-law, speak politely to her. This makes no sense. You cannot cancel your mother-in-law. You can call up your mother-in-law. You can call on your mother-in-law. However, you cannot call off your mother-in-law. Let's do one last question. Which of these sentences is correct? Pause the video and consider. It was called off. It called off. They called off it. Only the first is correct. This is a separating phrasal verb in the passive. For more practice with phrasal verbs, please go to the web links section of the course. Thank you.